What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. And welcome back, soldiers. We are back with another Endverse Academy episode. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Abysscraft. And what version of Abysscraft, you might ask? We're going to be talking about 2-cost Abyss. So this is a deck that's definitely going to be seen during the set 8 meta. I think this is going to be a very popular deck. Now, as far as it being good and whatnot, we'll definitely figure that out towards the end of the video and as we go along, but I think this is a pretty solid deck if you're going to be picking it up. So let's see what this deck has in its contents. Alright, and before we start getting into individual cards, you should already know we're going to do the pros and cons of the deck. Alright, so starting with our pros, we have Draw, Hand Hate, Burn, and Storm, while in the cons we have Rose Queen, Late Game, and Hard Removal. And starting with the first pro, we have Draw. So this deck does draw a bit of a lot, so it is nice to use one of the cards that we have to get some Sanguine active, but there's going to be another card that says if we have Sanguine active, we get to draw 2 cards. And along with another pro of drawing, there is some hand hate in the deck if you choose to go that route, but I think it's going to be a solid route to just go ahead and go the hand hate route. So hand hate and just destroying your opponent's hand and sniping random cards that they may or may not need is just pretty good. And then we have Burn. So the non-interactive form of damage is just something you want to look forward to in a deck. So if your opponent's going to be taking X amount of damage and they can't stop it unless they have a singular card on field, then, you know, I think that's pretty good to look at. And then we have Storm, so it's one thing to be burning your opponent through burn damage, but playing a card the same turn you're able to swing with is just too good value. Alright, and getting over into our cons, so our first con we have is Rose Queen, and now listen to me, okay? So Rose Queen isn't a bad card. It's not a bad boss monster, but it's not a very good card to have in the early turns. So the one thing that we really want to have is cards that have like a flexibility in use, like, hey, if I have Rose Queen in my hand, then, you know, is there a second ability that I can use to get this out of my hand in the early game to give me some either removal or, you know, a good draw? No, Rose Queen is going to sit in your hand like Rayo, and you're not going to be able to use her until like turn 7 or 8. And then moving on into late game. So I'd say that the late game is pretty good, especially if you have a good hand. But the one thing about the late game is it's very linear. If your opponent knows that you're playing Rose Queen, they're going to prepare for turn 7 and 8. They're not going to fill up their board, or they're going to either check you in some way to make sure, you know, by the time you get into Rose Queen, then you'll be in a bad spot. And then lastly, we have Hard Removal. So this deck has not a lot of hard removal. Yes, we have some cards that are able to do X amount of damage, maybe 3, 4 here, but when it comes to hard removal, if I have a 7/7 follower on the field and leave it unengaged, then what can this deck really do? Alright, and let's talk about Crimson Rose Queen. So she's a 6-cost 4/4. When she comes into play, you put a Thornbush token into your EX area and you can evolve her for 2. When she is evolved, she turns into a 6/6, but on evolve, you reveal your hand. Recover play points equal to the number of 2-cost cards revealed this way. Whenever you play a card that originally cost 2, choose one of the following. Either 1, deal 2 damage to each enemy follower on the field and give your leader +2 defense, or deal 2 damage to each enemy leader. So this is going to be the legendary card that we're going to be using for the late game. I don't think there's any flex spots for anything else because I don't think there's a 2-cost boss monster. So Crimson Rose Queen is going to be our go-to card for the 2-cost. And while she does lack in stats paying for a 6-cost, it really does make up for it when you evolve it. So you do have to make sure you evolve her in the very same turn you play her, honestly. So playing out a Thornburst is very nice, so you get to deal 3 damage to whatever follower you want or leader and then draw a card. And then in tandem with the evolve, you can do an extra 2 damage to enemy leader, or you can deal 2 damage to each enemy follower on the field and then heal 2. Alright, so let's talk about the 2-cost package that came from this set. So a lot of 2-cost cards that really came that are really helping is starting with our first card, Vuela. So looking at Vuela, One-Winged Demon, she's the 2-cost 2/3, the premier golden card that really helps generate a lot of draw and a lot of play in your deck. So when you play her, she doesn't do anything, but you can activate for 1 play point to reveal a top card of your deck. If it's a 2-cost card, put it into your EX area and it costs 2 less to play this turn. Activate only once per turn. Now this card is very good, especially since we're going to be filling up our entire deck with 2-cost cards. So the rest of the cards you can see here, if it's on the top of our deck, it's going to become free in our EX area that we can use the very same turn. And moving on into Zealot of Lust, so she's a 2-cost 3/2, and she has an activate ability to give your leader -1 defense, and you select the enemy follower on the field and deal 1 damage, and you can activate only twice per turn. So a 2-cost card that's able to get us some Sanguine, which is very good because we are in Abysscraft, so why wouldn't we want to ping ourselves for 1 to potentially either heal for more, or to potentially ping ourselves for 1 to get some more damage in? And the next card that's going to be pairing up very nicely with Zealot of Lust is Kiss of Lust. So it's a 2-cost spell. You give your leader +2 defense and you draw a card, and if Sanguine is active for you, you draw 2 instead. So this card is wonderful in combination with Zealot of Lust. So you then ping yourself for 2 with Zealot of Lust to ping a follower for 2, or ping a follower for 1 if you're going against something aggressive, whatever you need to do. But using Kiss of Lust right afterwards to heal 2 and then draw 2 is just some very good filter, very good draw, and you get to recover your health that you use to deal damage to an enemy follower. Alrighty, and then next up we have Manifest Malice. So it's a 2-cost spell, and you select the enemy following field, deal it 3 damage, and you may banish 4 cards from your cemetery. If you do, return this card to its owner's hand. Alright, so I will say that this is a very nice ability in a card to deal 3 damage by spending 2, but I'm going to be honest, there is a 2-cost card that is in set 7, which makes this card kind of blow away. The only difference here is that you're able to return this card to your hand by banishing 4 cards in our cemetery, which we don't really do because we want to have Necrocharge at all times. Alright, so let's talk about Rulenye. So Rulenye got some support here, which is very good in this deck too, because we have the 2-cost card Sonata of Silence. So looking at Sonata of Silence, it's a 2-cost spell. You select a Rulenye Omen of Silence in your cemetery, summon it. Necrocharge 10, each opponent discards a random card. I think the Rulenye package is very good in this deck just because you're able to snipe random cards out of your opponent's hand, and just the RNG of just getting a potential boss monster or, you know, maybe some trash. There's definitely that when it comes to discarding a random card, but just having the hand hate in your deck to just get a random card out of your opponent's hand to potentially snipe something that might be very good, or you're maybe against a slower tempo-y deck where they don't really draw that much, they're really relying on the top card of their deck or seeing a follower that's going to let them search through their deck, and hitting that with a random card might be just potentially good. And with the double combo of playing Sonata of Silence, having Necrocharge 10 to get potentially 2 cards out of your opponent's hand by evolving Rulenye the very same turn. Alright, so I wanted to talk about neutrals for the deck, but I think Arbiter is really the only neutral you want to play. The only honorable mention I do want to make is Tartman, but you should only probably run one of Tartman because Tartman's going to be a little matchup specific, because if you go against an aggressive deck that's going to be rushing you down and you play Tartman, which is going to feel really bad. So it's just really hand in hand, but I do really want to put the spotlight on Arbiter. So Arbiter is our 5-cost 5/5. You can evolve him for 2, but when he comes into play, you declare any number, bury the top 5 cards of your deck, deal X damage each enemy following the field, X equals the number of cards buried this way that cost that declared the number. And of course with this deck, when using Arbiter's ability, we're going to choose the number 2. Hopefully the top 5 will be 2-cost cards. And then with the on-evolve ability, we'll be able to get whatever 3 cards we have back from doing the top 5, so those cards aren't going to be gone forever. But dealing potentially 5 damage to the entire board is going to be very good, especially if your opponent's going to be keeping tempo with you. Alright, so the game plan of the deck. So the one thing that this deck wants to do is survive or just have a lot of generation of either healing and drawing and removing your opponent's board. So it kind of feels like a control deck, but also a tempo deck, especially if you have the Rulenye package in there too. So you really want to get into your Rose Queen late game. So that's what we're going to want to focus on, is with our 2-cost cards that we have in our deck. We're going to either be burning followers or burning life and just trying our best to keep interaction until we get into those 7-8 play points play. And of course, soldiers, you know I would be setting a bad example if I'd be talking about a deck that I know nothing about, so I'm going to provide some examples of using the first ability of Rose Queen if you don't already know. We're going to spend 6 and we're going to play Crimson Rose Queen. We're going to put a Thornburst token to re-X area. We're going to spend 1, or our last Evo, and 1. We're going to evolve Rose Queen. We're going to reveal our hand, and for however many 2-cost cards are in my hand, I recover that many play points. I'm gonna recover
4.
4. So we have 5. So we're gonna spend 2 and do Thornburst. I'm gonna draw a card. I'm gonna deal you 3 through Thornburst, and we're gonna heal 2 and deal 4 to the board. Deal 2 to the board, excuse me. Then we're gonna spend 2. And we're gonna play Manifest Malice, and we're gonna do 3 damage to Wilbert, and we're gonna heal 2 and deal 2 to the board again.
Okay, so you'll take 3 damage back, right? Or no?
I'll take 1 from Wilbert, because everything's
Oh.
not dead yet.
Since he's off the field, it no longer happens.
Well, I only did 4 to the board. You have 5. Those are 5.
Oh.
But I'm going to swing into both of them with Crimson Rose Queen and
Okay.
So Rose Queen takes 3. And it's your turn after that. And I hope you enjoyed that first section of the example. Chris was playing a very interesting deck that I think I made a long time ago. So we really were just testing the decks out. And of course, you know, for the second ability, I can't leave that out as well. So I will also show you the second ability and me winning the game. We'll spend 6. And we'll play out Rose Queen. Get a Thornburst in the EX area. Spend 2 and we'll Evo. Reveal my hand. I have 4.
4 for 4.
We'll cover. We're gonna spend 2 to do Thornburst. And I'm gonna deal you 3 damage and then deal you 2 damage with Crimson Rose Queen. Then I'm gonna spend 2 to play Kiss of Lust to heal me and draw me a card, and then deal you 2 damage. And yes, that is how Rose Queen's ability works. So that's really what you want to do when the game plan is get to Rose Queen and potentially close out the game. You really want to have your opponent in a pretty good area where your hand is pretty full with 2-cost cards, at least, you know, 7, if you can definitely get there, or maybe 6 for having, you know, the extra card you have in turn. But just having as many 2-cost cards you have in your hand to go for the Rose Queen turn to recover those play points, and then start playing cards out to either start burning or start dealing damage to the entire board and healing and get that recovery back. I think it's just a very good late game. And I know, soldiers, I didn't have any tech for the deck. This deck is pretty linear, I'd like to say. It has a pretty, I think I give it a pretty decent grade, but of course, you know, before we get into that, let's look at 2 deck lists that I have provided. We have one from Shintoverse, so thank you, Shinto Senpai, for giving us a decent deck list from the JP version. And then we have my own personal brew that I kind of just played around with and had a different experience and, you know, some extra burn for the deck. So let's go ahead and check those out. Alright, and here we are with Shintoverse's deck list. So this is the example from JP, which is pretty solid. I like the deck a whole bunch. The one key difference that's going to be the difference from my deck and this deck is going to be the Dub Flame. I think this is a very good card to use, don't get me wrong, especially with the versatility of having the Evolve card. That's going to be either dealing 2 damage or 4 damage to a follower. I think the extra removal is just very good, and then you get a 3/3 follower as well. I think this is a pretty solid build. Alright, so here is my version of the build. Now, I know at first glance it kind of looks the same, but there are some key differences, and here is how I will explain them. So I only had 2 key differences in the deck, and personally for me, I really enjoyed the Servant of Silence. I like what this card has to provide. It really gets you into that Necrocharge 10 a little easier. Of course, there is the possibility that you might, you know, mill one of your 2-cost cards, or Arbiter, or Rose Queen, and stuff like that, but I think we might need to make the deck a little bigger. That's the one edit that I would make to this deck, is just make it a little bigger, but that does make it a little inconsistent. But I think the Servant of Silence and the discard package means you're going to be tearing through your opponent's hand, so the game's going to go a little bit longer than usual. And the second card, so the one card that I did say, or the one thing that it did say was one of the cons for the deck was the hard removal. Of course, we don't have the Nicola to deal 6 damage to something, but just dealing 4 to any follower is just too good to pass up, so I'm going to be using Forbidden Art in the deck. But yeah, soldiers, that is both the decks. I have both deck codes down below in the description below if you want to go ahead and check those out, both Shinto's and I's versions, and I highly recommend you to play around with it and get a good feel for the deck, and then play around to what your locals, or what your regional, or what you might be expecting going into the future with tournaments. All right, now getting back into the grading of the deck. So I think the deck is pretty solid. If you have a good mid game where you're going to be tearing through your opponent's hand, if you see those cards, or if you're able to keep Vowella on the board to just keep tearing through your deck and looking at the top card, putting it into the EX area, and if it's not a 2-cost card, which, you know, I'm not very good with percentages, but at least 75% of your deck is 2-cost cards, if not more, then you should definitely hit these cards. Alright, and I'm sorry, soldiers, I want to give a nice little apology that I didn't have any tech for the deck, but I will pull the card up here that is something that you might want to look at. I know it's a little risky to play, but I think Spectre is a very good card you might want to look at because it's a 2-cost card, helps you with the Necro Charge, and it's very good hard removal. So if it's something you want to look at, especially when using Vowella and just keeping that card into your EX area, and putting it in a very tight position where, hey, my opponent warded up, there's a big ward on the field, well, Spectre can definitely, you know, answer the card, and especially if our opponent doesn't have any play points up, that's just a free removal. But like I said, this card is very risky, so I would advise against it. But if you need to tech against some big removal, or the meta shifts into a big removal card where big cards are coming out and you can't really deal with them, then I understand. Now getting back into the grade of things, I think the deck is pretty consistent. I don't think there's a bad opening hand just because you need 2-cost cards. Of course, you know, we're going to want Rulenye in one of the top 3 turns, of course, just so we can get a random card and make our opponent's spells a little more expensive, and then hitting Necro Charge 10 as fast as possible. And of course with the downside of having to wait for a long time with Rose Queen, but the thing about Rose Queen is she can end games, so that's very good as well. So it's not like Rail where you have to wait and then get a pretty mid ability. You can be dealing damage to the board, recovering health, or you can be dealing 2 damage to the enemy leader. So if I were to give this deck a solid grade, I would give it an A, maybe an A-. I think an A is a solid place to put it. I think this deck has a lot going for it. It's not going to be the best deck, I don't think. I don't think it's going to be one of those decks that's going to be like tier 1 meta, tier 0, or anything. I think everything is pretty fair and balanced with this deck. But as far as maybe going into the Puppet Force matchup, it's probably going to be back and forth. But I think this deck is pretty solid. But alright soldiers, that is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. It means a lot to me that you're watching the video. And of course, stick around. I have a bloopers right before the end of the video that me and Chris were recording, and then we were interrupted by a friend and we were very confused. So I'm going to drop it here at the end. But alright soldiers, make sure you're safe in whatever you do tonight, and safe whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Okay, we'll draw. Get a 6.
Hello.
Oh, Rod scared me.
Are any of y'all
Oh,
trying to
that
play
was Rod. I was
Direct
like,
Mate
am I
Ranked?
getting an ad right now?
I thought I was gonna add 2. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do. What I got to do. Just to get you away. What I got to do.